Jacqueline Laguardia Martinez is an interesting person to talk to. With several degrees in economics, history, and sociocultural studies, right now she is a professor at the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. You can talk to her about the Caribbean culture, the economy, history, about pretty much everything. In this occasion, we discuss about the economical relationship between Cuba and the Caribbean nations, the impact of the United States policy towards the region and how it affects the area, and also how the youth can be an important asset for a positive changing strategy. With Jacqueline Laguardia Martinez, we have the pleasure to talk today and from Havana. Well, thank you so much for accepting this conversation. You are a teacher now, you work with young people. Do you think there is a boom of the banality of youth when we come to speak about their participation in strategies for positive change in the region?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation. I'm very excited for being here. Well, I'm not sure about young people and banality in the region. I believe that it is us, maybe the new generation of lecturers, that we are not aware of the way young people now communicate, and we are not aware of how young people want to project and what is the future they want. What do I say that? It is, I mean, for instance, when I'm teaching in the university, I can see young people behaving differently. I can see them interacting differently, and of course, for us, sometimes we might think they are less serious or they are more entertaining things that we believe are not that important. But I believe that we are failing as educators and lecturers on how to understand them and how to motivate them again. So what I believe is that we are failing on understanding young people today. I believe that we have a view that is not necessarily the way we need to interact with them and to understand them. And why do I say that? I believe that our goals or objective and the way we visualized our future is not the same that young people have today. So it's not necessarily that they are less serious, but it is that we are failing on connecting with them. I see that they interact better with them, and I also see that when they have a commitment and they have a goal, they can be very, they can strategize, they can come together, they can fight for what they want. But we need to motivate them maybe to go back to part of the goals we had as generation before.
And what would be their role in this change?
I believe we need to make them understand that the future belongs to them. And I believe that they need to be aware that we care about them. And they also need to feel that they are leaders. Because sometimes we try to teach them all the time, we try to guide them all the time, and we tend not to give them the role they do have in a society, because they do have a voice. We cannot pretend to know everything because we are older or we are more educated, because they do have something to say, and I'm sure they have a lot of expertise in their own way that we can actually benefit from. But we need to learn how to interact with them. And also we have all this media and all this new digital world that we do not understand. So we have this major, this breaking in terms of communicating with them. So we need also to learn their ways, and we need to empower them as well. We need to respect them as young people and understand that if we want to have them and make them more committed in social and political objectives, they need to know that we actually respect their views.
Talking about youth, I was talking to Hassan Perez, who once was one of the most involved young people in the politics here in our country. Mm-hmm. He told me that the socialism was the horizon of our people. Are you agree with this?
I can speak from a Caribbean perspective, because this is maybe the environment I work more nowadays. In the Caribbean, the word socialism is a very difficult word to talk about. And I'm saying that because we need to understand history. And in the region of the Caribbean, especially the English-speaking Caribbean, socialism and communism has been portrayed in a very bad, sometimes even evil way. So people are kind of reluctant to actually being committed to these ideas of socialism. It does not mean that they are not sympathetic with many of the ideas of what socialism actually is. But I believe that we need also to reinvent, and we need to come with a fresh perspective of what socialism is and have a more direct dialogue with younger generations. Maybe we can think about what is going on now in the US and socialism. And you know that in the US, all these young people, they are now getting a new understanding of what socialism is because of all this new wave in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders. And all this kind of phenomena, we could have something like that in the Caribbean if we get a new way of actually talking about socialism and making young people to understand what the history of socialism is. Because actually what the social fight in the Caribbean and the social goals in the Caribbean, many of them has not been attained yet. There are many problems there. There is poverty, there is inequality, and many of the social benefits that exist in the Caribbean are now undermenaced. So there are reasons to fight, and there is a lot of socialism in terms of what socialism could mean as an ideology and as a vision. But people need to know exactly what we are talking about, because the first thing is that they do not know what socialism is. There are many wrong ideas, and there's a lot of propaganda against socialism that is affecting young people to interact with this vision of future that I believe has a place in the Caribbean.
The correlations of forces have changed in the region, in the Caribbean, in Latin America in general.
Yeah.
Why do you think is this happening? The rise of the right wings and neoliberal governments?
That's a very difficult question, and at least in the Caribbean, I believe that we can also see what is going on in Latin America. We see a tendency of going more to conservative and more harsh politics in government and in the political life. I believe there is a big wave of disappointment. So people today, they are trying to walk away of traditional political parties, and they are trying to find new voices. It doesn't mean that new voices are better voices. It doesn't mean that new voices are the ones that could come with an answer. But people are very disappointed. People do not trust the political system anymore, and they are trying to bet for newcomers. And we, in the Caribbean, it's not happening that much yet, but we could see a lot of disappointment. People are very disappointed because of corruption. This is something that is very that is actually very present in many of the Caribbean political life. So I believe that in the Caribbean we could expect more of this new trend of moving away from progressive governments and maybe getting more to conservative political leaders as well.
And how can we stop this forecast you are seeing now?
Well, my vision is that I believe that the political systems in the region needs to change. Remember that, especially in the Caribbean, we have the heritage of the colonial past, and the colonial past, especially in the English-speaking Caribbean, has shaped the political system very much following the UK, the British system, and also mirroring a lot to the US political system. And these two systems, actually, we can see that are in major problems today. We can see the phenomenon of Trump in the US, we can see the Brexit and the new prime minister in the UK. So we can see that these political systems are in a big trouble now. And the Caribbean is a reflection of that. So what I believe is that they need to rethink their own political systems, and if they want to be bold and they want to change, they need to move away and try to find new political ways to go there. And I believe young people have a lot to say there.
Do you think the rates of acceptance? I mean, I've written that the political acceptance of the U.S. policy against in the area, in the Caribbean and Latin America, has fallen a little bit. That means that they have lost influence in the region.
I believe that after Trump getting elected as president, there has been a lot of resistance in the Caribbean in terms of looking at the US as an example of democracy. We of course know that it has never been the case, but in terms of the Caribbean political life, there was a time, especially with Obama, that the political system in the US and the political life in the US and the relations of the US with the Caribbean this relation, they were on a better moment. But now with the Trump administration, the US acceptance in the Caribbean has fallen tremendously, I could say, especially because of the policy against migrants, because of the US policy against poor countries in the region. So in the Caribbean, there is a lot of resentment in terms of how the US treats its neighbors. And especially because we can see that there's a very clear pattern of racism in the US policy today, and in the Caribbean they resent that a lot. So I believe that the US, the next administration, if they want to re-win or to come back to the Caribbean and reshape the relation, they need to work very, very hard.
Well, you're talking about the next administration. Maybe the next November, Trump goes for a second term. It would change something in the way they are being projecting their administration to the region, or it will be the same. What do you think about that?
This is a very difficult question. I mean, first, we are not sure that Trump will win. He might.
Well, he changed the economy, and he's on his way to make America great again, as he say, and people see that. People see through the insides of their country. Maybe they don't see the foreign policy of the state, but I think he's gonna win again.
Well, let's wait till November. Supposing he win, because actually there is a chance he might win. I'm not sure how his second term will conduct a policy towards the Caribbean, because let's be honest, so far the Caribbean has been used for other purposes of foreign policy in the US, and we can see that very clear with the case of Venezuela. They have come to the Caribbean and they have been approaching the Caribbean to use them to support their very aggressive policy against Venezuela. This is how the Caribbean suddenly started to be important for them, and they had a very clear approach of going country by country and try to take a distance from CARICOM, for instance. So we are not sure. I personally do not believe that there is a structured policy towards the Caribbean from the US administration today, except to get support for all their foreign policy goals, or maybe in terms of energy. That is something that they have always been very conscious about, and they actually take into consideration the energetic policy in the US and the energetic strategy in the region. But besides that very specific approaches, I don't see a clear plan to promote investment, or a clear plan to promote economic development, or a clear plan that speaks to the Caribbean by itself.
Well, speaking of relationships, Cuba has been a very important piece in the history of the Caribbean. How would be the economical relationship between the Caribbean and Cuba if there was no embargo?
When now thinking about this question, I remember when Cuba reestablished relations with the US. Do you remember in December the 17th, all this new moment that we thought could last longer? There was a very interesting reaction in the Caribbean, because as you said, Cuba is a central piece in the Caribbean. Let's face it, it's the largest island in the Caribbean, it's one of the most populated countries in the Caribbean. So it means that Cuba in the Caribbean is seen as a giant, and we don't have that perspective, because we tend to think about ourselves as a very small country, which we are, but everything is relative in life. In the Caribbean, we are huge compared to the rest of the island.
That's an interesting fact.
So the Caribbean countries, they welcomed the new moment because they understand that less tensions between Cuba and the US is a benefit for the region, because less political tensions means that they have a better political environment to interact, because for the Caribbean, the US is a very important economic investor, even a security partner to take into consideration. But at the same time, there was fear, because in the new moment, in the new context, they couldn't measure how Cuba could be a competence. So how will Cuba be a new actor in the Caribbean in this new moment? Is Cuba going to attract more investment from the US that might be investment from us? Even in terms of tourism, the Caribbean economists, they thought that a lot of US tourists could prefer to go to Cuba instead of going to them. So it was a mixed reaction. Of course, they welcomed the news, they understood it was beneficial. Many of the friends that Cuba has in the region were very happy because they could see Cuba going into a better context in terms of an economic context, with maybe the embargo going away, something that never happened, but at the moment that was part of the possibilities. But at the same time, there was concern, because Cuba has always been seen in the Caribbean as a partner in cooperation, a partner in many aspects, but never as an economic competitor. And the new context could mean Cuba being an economic competitor. So there was a lot of mixed reactions, and the truth is that we never finished to see how this story ended. So this is something that is still a question mark. We don't know how this is going to react in the future. My view is that from Cuba and from the Caribbean, we need to see the new moment as an opportunity to become economic partners, the economic partners that we are not yet. We have been talking in the Caribbean for many, many years about this joint tourism. Why we cannot have a joint Caribbean tourist destination? Why we cannot have joint programs and people coming from out of the region and visiting Cuba, Havana, Santiago, then going to Jamaica, then going to Barbados? Why we cannot do that? This is how we tend to benefit, all of us, from the new context instead of being competing among us. But you know, in the Caribbean, it was a very interesting moment, because Cuba was seen as the menace that we never thought Cuba could be seen as.
But I didn't know that. Actually, that never crossed my mind for.
And for us, it's very difficult, because we tend to see our country as a small island developing state, which actually is. But compare, Cuba has 11 million people, and Trinidad and Tobago, one of the most important economic actors in the region, they only have 1.3 million people. This is less than Havana City. Jamaica has maybe around 5-6 million people. So everything is relative. And when you look in terms of the natural resources, and when you look the amount of educated population and the professional capacity that Cuba has, definitely it is an important economic actor if the potentiality of Cuba can actually develop the way we hope it happens someday without the embargo.
Right now, how's the health of the economical relationships between the Caribbean and Cuba?
We have been trying for many, many years to promote economic relations, and actually I believe in 2000 there is an economic agreement of partnership between Cuba and the CARICOM economies, because we are trying actually to foster and to improve that economic relation. But the main problem is that, and we go back to the colonial past, the main problem is that we have a structure or economic relation with actors outside the region. The Caribbean, where are the main economic partners of the Caribbean? Europe, the US. This is basically where the partners are concentrated. Where are the main economic partners of Cuba? Europe, Spain, that is the all metropolitan power, and Latin America less. So there is a division that is a very interesting one because it's not connecting geographical neighbors in terms of having economic relations. We tend to trade, we tend to promote investment, not necessarily about neighbors. We go and we look away and we tend to reproduce the colonial pattern. So this is why colonialism actually has a print in our life in the Caribbean that we tend not to see, but it's there. And we have tried many, many times to promote that economic relationship, but it has not developed yet.
There are any differences between the British, the Dutch, and the French countries in the Caribbean? You know,
Many. Yes.
differences economically speaking,
Yes and no.
because of their past. That's what I mean. There are differences.
Well, you can see in the Caribbean that most of the Caribbean economies are specialized on tourism. The main exception could be Trinidad and Tobago. There is an energy producer, especially gas and oil. But most of the Caribbean economies, they have made the bet with tourism and services, especially financial services. This is what they are trying to specialize. Some of them, like Jamaica, they have some natural resources. They might exploit like bauxite, aluminum. I'm not sure how to say that in English. But most of them, they tend to concentrate on tourism and financial services. And in a certain way, we all compete because we were created to compete among ourselves. We were all sugar producers. We were all put in the international pattern of trade following a very similar pattern. So it is very difficult for us to understand how to complement. But this is our task today. We cannot keep on reproducing the same colonial pattern, how we are supposed to participate in the global economy. At the same time, it's very difficult because how you are going to recreate a new economic structure. You can have the idea, but how do you have the resources to promote a new economic activity? Where is the investment? How do you create industries? How do you create manufacture? Do you even have the land space to have factories? Do you have the raw materials to produce? Do you have to import raw materials? So what you could do as an economy to be competitive in today's world? Where is the niche you can participate? How can you complement? It's a very difficult task.
Well, the tourism we were talking about, this whole network would be a trampoline to do that.
That could be a really good alternative. And this is interesting. We have been talking about for many, many years, but at the same time, let us look about the tourism activity. Who controls that? Who are the main investors? Are they Caribbean actors or are they foreign actors? How do we have the mechanisms to make that happen? We need the political will and we need some economic resources to actually make that to move forward. Because again, when you look at the Caribbean, main economic actors and main investors might not be necessarily Caribbean investors. So it's complicated. It is not that Caribbean economies are just sitting there and doing nothing to change because they do not want to. They know where the problem is. The point is how you can do that. And Cuba has a little bit of that as well. You have a very clear strategy, but where are the resources to do so? It's difficult to find them.
Well, thank you so much for this time. It's been a pleasure to know you and to learn from you too.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.